No, I wouldn't really think that, because in a sense that's putting what happens in the future based on what we haven't done or done here. My view is if someone enters into a relationship, God, or becomes awakened to that, um, what they're awakened to is the reality that God has already forgiven them. They're already born from above, they're entering into the work of the cross, which is finished, and they're enjoying that whilst they're operating in that relationship. Should they choose to walk independently of God again, there is no grace to restore them other than the grace that's already restored them. So there's nothing. That's what it talks about in Hebrews about, well, there's no other way. There's no other way. They've already received the way. They may then have consequences of what's happening to them on earth. If they choose to live a life and go back into drug, well, they could end up dying from doing that. And therefore they're almost saying, well, I don't need God's protection. I'm doing this myself. And they're going back to following the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which has consequences. And those consequences aren't God punishing them. They are the result of the choices they make on earth. When they get into that, let's say they do die physically, and they have been awakened, even though they might have chosen to forget that or accept it, then it says God will wipe away their tears. So there's a sense where they enter in. They don't have to go through the fire of, they will face the judgment seat, because that judgment seat is fire, but it's not the fire that people don't know God. It's the fire for those who do know God. And we, of course, can enter that judgment seat now and don't have to go through that later date, in a way, because our scroll can be purified and there can be gold, silver, precious stones, and all the wood, hay, and straw can be removed. Now, they might have very few gold, silver, and precious stones on their scroll because they might have not really fulfilled most of what God has called them to do from this earthly perspective. And they might have a load of straw and wood, hay, and rubbish and all that stuff. So that will get purified by the fire of God's eyes, and the regret and loss will be wiped away, and all the tears are wiped away. So there's no hindrance to them entering into an ongoing fulfillment of their destiny, which outworks in the realms of heaven, because he wipes away their tears by putting them through that process. But it's not the same as those who never entered into a relationship with Jesus, who go to the fire of a different place. It's still the fire of God's love, and it's just how that gets outworked differently, I think. So they don't go back to a lost state, because in a sense, the lost state is only the state of their mind at the time. From God's perspective, no one's lost, are they? They're still his. He's not lost them. They've lost who they are. He's not lost them. They're still his. They're still his children. He still loves them. He's not lost them, but they've lost touch with him. So that then gets dealt with. So I don't think they have to go through the same process as someone who's never entered into a relationship with God and would have no idea of what their scroll was. They would have had some idea. They may have chosen for various reasons. I mean, some people go through that because of trauma. Some people through religious abuse, and they reject church, and some get sucked into it through mystic people who take them back into drugs to go and get into supernatural experiences. So there's all sorts of stuff out there. But I wouldn't say, people say, well, can you lose your salvation? Well, you never sort of gained your salvation through works. So you can't lose something that never was accomplished by works. Jesus said, God, no one can snatch you out of the Father's hand. From my perspective, that's what I've seen. I've seen people coming into that realm and going to various places. I remember having an encounter with a group of us, and we were watching people come into the realm of heaven and where they went. And it was like, oh, there's several places people are going here. Where are they going? Why are they going there? So that was just my experience. Now, in one sense, it's a moot point, because anyone who did go into that place and already had an awakened sense and they'd chosen a different way are going to choose to come back pretty quick. because they already have an awakened conscience. They may have seared it. But I generally think that what Jesus does with those people, because they have chosen, and even though you can say, well, they went back on their choice, I think they would go through the fire of a different process. But to be honest, it doesn't really matter in the long run, because they're all going to enter and be restored to a relationship with God one way or another. Just depends on which way and how long they want to resist that choice. For me, love wins, love overcomes. But some of the question, I think, comes from, backsliding in those days was losing your salvation, and therefore there was no way out. Well, I never believed that you could lose no matter what you did, even those days. I never believed in, losing your salvation, because I think I came from a Calvinistic perspective. Well, God chose you, but Calvinism obviously is a limited choice, only chooses some, whereas now I believe God chooses everybody. so I'm still probably more aligned to, well, it's more about God than it is about us. And what happens to us is more about God, and therefore God's goodness, kindness, patience, tolerance, faithfulness, than our faithfulness. So I always place it, well, what's God's character like, and what would God do in this situation? And that's what would probably shape my understanding of it, because God is tolerant, he's patient. Hi everyone, we're starting a Patreon page, patreon.com/freedomarc. And we would like to invite you to partner with us in taking the message of God's unconditional love, limitless grace, triumphant mercy to a bigger global audience.